May I speak to your father? I'm Canadian Jewish News.
That's what it sounded like in the Montreal courthouse on Wednesday afternoon as Rabbi Shlomo Leib Mund left the building quickly without speaking to reporters. Moments earlier, a Quebec judge acquitted him of 2 sex crime charges. The 82-year-old former Montreal yeshiva educator and unlicensed marriage counselor was arrested 2.5 years ago after the victim, who can't be identified because of a court-ordered publication ban, originally pressed 3 charges against him, which they alleged happened in 1997, nearly 30 years ago, when they were 7 or 8 years old and visiting the rabbi in Montreal. The victim testified they were warned never to be alone with the rabbi. But on that day, the victim told the court she was walking from her aunt's house on Barclay Avenue in Montreal when the rabbi drove by in a gold-colored car, rolled down the window, and then the next thing she knew, he was laying on top of her in the back seat of the car. She testified that he kissed her on her right cheek and rubbed his penis on her left thigh. In 2021, the victim went to police. By then, Rabbi Mund was living in Israel, having retired from the Montreal yeshiva where he'd been teaching, and with his reputation in tatters after being ordered by Montreal's rabbinical court to step down as a leader of the small Orthodox congregation that used to meet in his house. The order came after the rabbis had received a different complaint about him behaving inappropriately with an adult female patient who'd come to see him for marriage counseling. Mund admitted this in court, that it was true, but no one went to the police in that case or any others until now. In April 2022, Mund flew in from Israel to visit family for Passover. He was arrested at the Toronto airport and charged. He's been under house arrest, staying with one of his sons for the past 2.5 years in Toronto while the case proceeded through the justice system. While Mund himself wasn't speaking to journalists, his defense lawyer, Jesse Héroux, did.
One victim of sexual assault is one too many. These cases are very serious and they need to be taken seriously by the criminal court system. Mr. Mund claimed his innocence on day 1. He's been acquitted today. He's happy and now he wants to go back home.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Thursday, September the 26th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible in part with the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxime Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
In Berlin, rumors are spreading.
Holocaust victims, their bodies are just dug up.
It's a shunda.
But the truth is even more unnerving.
Was your family in the Shoah?
Dude looks like he was in the Shoah.
As the world panics.
This is some ritual, bringing the dead back to life.
No, you said this wasn't illegal.
It isn't, I don't think.
One woman seeks the truth.
These are questions you can't answer.
And you're too afraid to even ask them.
Justice, a Holocaust zombie story. An original audio drama from the CJN in association with the Ashkenaz Foundation. Listen now at thecjn.ca/zombies or wherever you get your podcasts.
Rabbi Mund always denied the allegations he had sexually abused the victim in this case. First of all, he told the court he never owned a gold car, only blue ones. But mainly, the judge ruled that while the victim believes she was sexually assaulted as a child, and the judge believes that she believes it, the Crown didn't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge felt the victim's testimony was inconsistent, unreliable, and the fact that the victim told the court they'd zoned out while it was happening didn't help because the victim couldn't remember seeing or touching the rabbi's penis or even knowing what a penis was until she was a grown-up. Rabbi Mund's lawyer suggested the victim fabricated some of the story, and the judge noted the victim even got some of her sisters to pretend they were her when calling other potential witnesses to help research the case. But the judge did feel the victim was legitimate in wanting to convince other vulnerable victims in the Orthodox Jewish community to come forward, who otherwise feared denouncing their abusers about sexual assault crimes committed in secret because of the harsh personal and professional consequences if they do so. The victim did not come to court Wednesday. When the verdict was read out, we reached out to them by email for comment, but received no response by press time. The Crown Prosecutor, François Giasson, felt there likely won't be an appeal.
This case has been a very important case people in the Jewish community are watching because this complainant was shunned, had to move. How important was this trial to set a precedent, do you think?
I can only, raise my hat and tell her that what she did was really courageous and it was worth it, even though the conclusion of it, it resulted in an acquittal. This is not a comment on what happened, as the judge put it. She's not saying that it did not happen. It's only that within the criminal system, she held that there was still a reasonable doubt.
Officials with the New Jersey-based Za'aka organization, which helps child victims of sexual assault in the Jewish Orthodox community, have been closely involved in the Mund trial. Asher Lowy and Ariel Kay join me. What was your reaction when you learned the news from me, I guess?
Well, I was heartbroken for the survivor who came forward, because I know how difficult it is in general in the community for survivors to come forward, but especially in this case, it was very difficult for the survivor to come forward, and nonetheless they bravely came forward with their story. And the criminal system has a notoriously high burden of proof. Cases are by definition difficult to get convictions on. But it's important that we acknowledge the bravery of the survivor in this case in coming forward in the first place. And I want to just note for any survivors who may be listening, whether of Mund or if anybody else, this shouldn't discourage you from coming forward. It's true that not every case is going to result in a conviction, but it's important to be able to tell your story in public. There are people who are now aware of this case who weren't before. There's now something on the public record. In the event that there are more victims, they will now be empowered to come forward. And that's something that the survivor accomplished, and that can't be taken away from her.
One thing that came to my mind, I just want to add into this as well, is I thought of Nicole Meyer, who is one of the survivors of Malka Leifer, because when the Australian courts came down and found Malka not guilty of sexually assaulting her, but guilty of sexually assaulting her sisters, and obviously Malka Leifer is a predator, but the courts for some reason found the burden of evidence not high enough to find her guilty for Nicole. It doesn't mean that what happened to Nicole didn't happen. People still acknowledge the fact, and it still is a fact, that Malka Leifer is predator, and Nicole was not making things up or fabricating things, and survivors that make it this far aren't necessarily fabricating things or making things up. I think about the victim. I think about the harassment that they faced from community members, from other people for coming forward.
The judge said a lot of things about how when a person has something happen to them as a child, that shouldn't be taken into account in terms of them testifying as an adult and understanding what was being done to them only later, such as which body parts, what were they called, what was the smell, what at the time the child would not have understood. They don't diminish what happened because they were a kid, and so they couldn't tell you it was a penis, or they couldn't tell you what was happening then because they didn't know until later.
No, I understand. You're saying that the specific minutiae of the colors and the sensory descriptions is not something that necessarily is carried on with adults as they get older, right? Not everybody remembers the color of the classroom that they were in when something traumatic happens, and it doesn't diminish what happened to them. It's unfortunate that that's used against them in courts. I believe there were also other survivors of Mund, some of which were even present at some point during the court proceedings. So it's important. It's important to note that this was not just this one victim coming forward, even though it's always one too many. But there are other testimonies that have also come out with this, and it's something to keep in mind that the evidence that wasn't necessarily made public in articles, it's still there.
So what happens now?
So in scenarios like this, we always tell survivors that there's civil courts and there's the criminal courts. You can move forward with a civil case regardless of whatever the verdict was in criminal court. An example of that would be in the situation with O.J. Simpson, right? He was acquitted for what he did to Nicole, but he was found liable in civil court and had to pay damages for that. In this scenario, I don't know if Rabbi Mund has any assets to go after, so I don't know if it would be a viable case in that regard. because civil litigation is mostly, if not all, predicated on assets and money. One of the things that I really admire about, an example would be Nicole Meyer, right? Is even despite the verdict that happened to her, she is still marching on. She's still educating the public. She's still speaking about what happened to her. She's still taking time out of her day. And I think it is possible to use this and to grow from this, even though it hurts right now, and it may hurt for a while, and that's okay too. It sucks. It hurts.
During the legal proceedings these past 2.5 years, Ruth Pinsky-Krevsky attended some of the hearings in Montreal, although she wasn't ever called to testify against Rabbi Mund, but she dearly hoped she would have been. She says she gave evidence to the Montreal police officer investigating the Mund case about her own experience as a student and then a patient of the rabbi. Ruth Pinsky-Krevsky now lives in Ottawa, where she's a teacher and a mother of 5. Welcome to the CJN Daily.
Thank you, Ellen. It's very nice to be here.
It's good to meet you. You've been following this case with great interest over the last couple of years. Can you tell our listeners why?
So I was a student of the accused, and he was a very warm, friendly kind of teacher, and he took a personal interest in me as a student when I returned to Montreal after a very traumatic, abusive marriage that lasted for a very short time. He said, I will help you. I will take care of you. And he used to call me every night and call me every morning and come to my house and spend an inappropriate amount of time with me. And I started feeling very uncomfortable with our interactions, and eventually I went to a therapist in the community, an Orthodox psychologist, and he helped me untangle what was happening. And while I was telling him about this and he was asking me about the details, he was masturbating on the phone. And I only discovered this from this psychologist that I was seeing at the time. The issue here really, and what I really want to focus on here, is not the details of my assault. It's the fact that I saw an Orthodox psychologist, that he told me that I was being sexually abused by this man. He was a mandated reporter and he didn't do anything about it. He knew that the accused was working with children. He knew that there had been rumors about the accused, because when people saw me hanging around with the accused, they said, you better stay away from it. So all of that was in 1986 or 7. People already knew. So when I later heard, many, many years later, that they found out that he actually assaulted a child, and it wasn't anymore just rumors about him having inappropriate relationships with young women, I was not the least bit surprised. And when I heard that he quietly went off to Israel, I wasn't the least bit surprised. And that is the problem. The problem is not that the accused is a pedophile and couldn't meet the burden of proof. The problem is that the Orthodox community continues to pass pedophiles around from community to community. They're still doing it. They're covering up The reason Rabbi Mund had so many victims is because he was an unofficial marriage therapist. And they were sending all the young 19-year-old newlywed women to him. And he was counseling them. And that's why the first day of the trial, you saw many women my age there. And we were there to support the victim because we were all victims of the accused. And we were there to support the one who had the courage to take him to court.
What made you not do that yourselves, or you, let's say, just speak for yourself?
I did call the police. I did speak with the police officer who was in charge of this particular case. She took my testimony and she said she did not think that yes, what he did was constituted sexual assault, but she did not think that it would be enough to bolster this particular victim's case. And that if she did, she would call me to testify, but she didn't think it would.
Wow. So was it the masturbating? You saw him masturbate, or you?
No.
So I don't understand how.
So I was this young, naive girl. You have to understand that even though I had been married for 2 years, I was divorced. An ultra-Orthodox divorced woman could still be very naive, right? Like, you have to understand that. I know it sounds strange, but it is. So I didn't understand when I was talking to him and I was telling him these things, and he was breathing heavily. He was making strange sounds, and I didn't understand what was happening. And I said to him, "Are you okay? Is something wrong?" I couldn't, like, the thought that he was masturbating while I was talking to him was it was so far from my mind. He was this holy rabbi. Have you seen him? Would you ever in a million years think that this guy was masturbating while you were talking to him? It's like it was the most, like, that would have been the most insane thing. I could
Okay. He didn't physically was in the same room with you, except when he came to your house and was like stalking you, whatever.
Pretty much.
Stalking or grooming, we call it today.
Inserting himself in my life too much.
Got it. What is the impact of this case for you that he's been acquitted?
For me, the impact is that there has to be accountability within the Orthodox community. I mean, I'm in cities like Montreal and Toronto, where you have large enclaves of Orthodox people, where they have essentially their own social services network, their own psychologists, their own internal kind of, as I say, social services network, and they keep the professionals out of it. We do this all, in-house, and they just, okay, well, he's not going to rape my kid, so it's okay.
Are you going to press your own charges?
I don't know. I feel that I have done my due diligence and fulfilled my responsibility regarding this episode of my life that happened over 40 years ago, and I'm ready to leave it alone now.
You were waiting for this day.
I was really hoping that, the world would see some justice here, and my heart goes out to the victim, and that they had the bravery to come forward and go through this process. I am of the generation, I know what they do to women on the stand. I'm not interested.
How old are you now?
59.
How did it end up? How did you get away from this? How did you stop seeing this rabbi?
So the psychologist that I was seeing at the time was able to help me through it. Like he said, these remarks are unacceptable. These things that he's doing are unacceptable, and this is unacceptable. And he helped me cut it off, end it, whatever. And I think if I recall correctly, I even told Mund, like, it's not, I mean, I didn't reference the actual masturbation episode, but I think I told him, like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I don't want to.
Did you tell your parents about this at the time or no?
Not that one, no.
And do you have a family now of your own? What are you doing now in your life?
Yeah, I'm a mother of 5. My oldest is 31 and my youngest is 16. And I'm a special education teacher. And
Are you still in the Orthodox community?
no. And it's absolutely 100% because of this issue. Absolutely. I mean, that's what led me to say I can no longer ally myself with these people. It's just completely unethical, immoral, and goes against anything and everything that, to me, Judaism stands for. And I cannot ally myself with these people anymore. So no, I am not part of the Orthodox community. And that has cost me dearly. That has cost me dearly.
Ruth, the person who you went to for the psychiatrist or psychologist did not tell you to report it to the police at the time?
He did not. And I know that there was another psychologist, another Orthodox psychologist in the community who knew as much as I knew or more and never reported. I know there are social workers in the community who knew as much as I knew and were mandated to report and never reported. And even if you're not a mandated reporter, where is your ethical and moral responsibility to children, to young, vulnerable women, even if they're not legally children? A 19-year-old woman is very vulnerable. Okay, so he's a predator. And they knew he was a predator. And when I talk to people about what happened with the accused, they say, oh, well, it wasn't children. It was just young women. So nobody did anything about it because it wasn't children. It was just young women.
Why do you know that he didn't have a gold car?
Because he used to lend me his car. It was very bizarre. In his community, women didn't drive. So I think it was like exciting for him that a woman would borrow his car and drive it.
It's not clear if Rabbi Mund will go back to Israel. He's set to receive his passport back at the end of the week. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part by the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. The Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. I welcome your comments on this story, which the CJN's been covering from day one. Thanks for listening.